And Russia's war on Ukraine rages on, despite the situation at home. Ukraine's President Volodymr Zelenskyy says the armed rebellion in Russia has exposed the Kremlin's weaknesses and is putting the spotlight on fractures in the Russian leadership, an opinion shared by many Ukrainian citizens.
The fighting is fierce on the front lines near Zaporizhia in southern Ukraine, one of the focal points of Kyiv's counteroffensive. While Russia was confronted with armed rebellion, Ukraine's forces were regaining ground. Many in Kyiv welcomed the news of Russia's domestic troubles.
I enjoy what is happening in Russia. The conflict between Prigozhin and Putin was coming for a long time. I don't know what may come out of it, but I wish they would shoot each other and die.
One person in particular was enjoying the chaos in the enemy camp, Ukrainian President Volodymr Zelenskyy.
The world saw that the bosses of Russia do not control anything. Nothing at all. It's complete chaos. A complete absence of any predictability. And it's happening on Russian territory.
Even so, Ukrainians know the war isn't over yet. The Kremlin insists Moscow is still focused on the invasion.
The special military operation continues. Our fighters on the front line are showing heroism. They are very effectively repelling the counter-offensive of the armed forces of Ukraine, and the operation will go on.
Outside the eastern city of Donetsk, a Ukrainian artillery battery hammers away. They say they will keep fighting until they drive the last Russian soldier off their soil.
We're now joined by DW's correspondent Nick Connolly, who is now in the Dnipro region. Hello, Nick. What responses have you seen by Ukrainians to yesterday's events in Russia?
Well, certainly, Eddie, yesterday people were just stuck to their phones, glued to their phones in kind of awed shock, not quite believing it at the beginning. And then once they saw those images of huge kind of processions of heavy tech rumbling down those roads towards Moscow, the sight of Russian military planes shot out of the air by the Wagner Group's own anti-aircraft, anti-missile defense systems, this really seemed like this was serious, like this was a real threat to Vladimir Putin's power. And there was obviously hope that now this was the kind of God-given, as it were, chance for Ukraine's offensive to make ground. There was a real sense that this was a unique window of opportunity, that Russia, having sent all these people to the battlefield, having armoured people who'd been in jail for some of the most extreme acts of violence, was now basically having to pay the price of that, having to see the consequences of putting these people in a position of power, giving them those weapons. And obviously there was a lot of satisfaction and a lot of hope here in Ukraine that this was the beginning of the end, if not of Vladimir Putin's rule, but of his ability to project force outside his borders.
So just to be clear, what you're saying is that people are expecting that the chaos in Russia would actually be to Ukraine's advantage on the battlefield.
Well, certainly that was the hope. We heard from the Deputy Defense Minister yesterday that Ukraine's forces had renewed and kind of dialed up their attempts to take ground all along the front lines in the eastern Donetsk and also here in the more kind of southern section of the front lines in the city of Zaporizhia. There was even a report yesterday of an attempt to make a bridgehead on the eastern bank of the Dnipro River opposite Kherson, which is also held by the Russians. That's the area where the flooding had caused so much damage in recent weeks, but where now the water is receding. And there was a real sense that this was now the time to really attempt to make ground and to really take advantage of this weakness. We don't have any real sense yet how successful those attacks have been, how much progress they've made. That normally takes a couple of days to filter through. But even given that this is now at least paused or over for now, there is a real sense that this is a long-term impact on the morale of Russian forces, that even if they get back to fighting, even if this kind of direct threat to Vladimir Putin's control is now over, that the chaos that has been seen the last few days, the kind of open dissent between different parts of Russia's elites, that will undermine long-term the willingness of Russian recruits, people who've been called up to fight, to risk their lives in Ukraine, and that will be to Ukraine's advantage.
There's a lot of questions about the future of the Wagner mercenary group. It's a group that's associated with some of the bloodiest battles in Ukraine. What does the Wagner group mean to Ukrainians?
Well, certainly they are associated with some of the worst fighting, the most intense fighting around Bakhmut, those incredibly bloody battles there. And they've also been accused of lots of ill treatment, mistreatment, potential war crimes of Ukrainian prisoners of war. So there's little sympathy for them there. I think it's really a situation where the Ukrainians wanted both the Russian military and the Wagner group to lose. And the sense now that this is by no means over. There had been some reports also based on some comments by a former British general. He was suspecting that potentially that withdrawal of the Wagner group to Belarus could see them trying to attack Kiev again from the north, so from that Belarusian border. I think for now that doesn't seem particularly likely yet. There isn't any indication that that is in any way on the cards, but certainly until Yevgeny Prigozhin returns to those African battlefields where he'd spent the previous years, I think people here in Ukraine won't be totally relieved that this threat is over. And for now, they're just focusing on that takeaway, that this conflict within Russia's armed forces. We've also seen lots of people in the Russian armed forces who'd basically been quite sympathetic to Prigozhin yesterday and kind of in various forms expressed their solidarity with him, that they're now going to face serious repression internally from their own army leadership. So anything that kind of causes the Russian forces here on the ground in Ukraine to basically concern themselves with each other and those internal conflicts is a positive takeaway, is a plus for Ukraine's fighters, who've really come up against more in the way of resistance since the beginning of this counteroffensive in recent weeks than they had hoped.
OK. Nick Connolly in Kyiv, thank you. Now, let's welcome Marina Miron, a military analyst at King's College London. Hello, Marina. What do yesterday's events mean for the war in Ukraine?
Good day. Well, the interesting part is when it all started, the Ukrainian armed forces were perhaps seeing an opportunity, as we were seeing chaos building up inside Russia, that they could benefit from that by attacking the Russian forces. However, I think that what happened essentially didn't really affect the situation in Ukraine very much. And now that this whole drama with Prigozhin is over, I don't think there will be any substantial changes. The question is now that what will happen with the Wagner group and whether it will be redeployed to Ukraine, and that will depend. However, we have to understand that the Wagner forces have not been in Ukraine since they left Bakhmut. So it seems that at this point, the Russians are not in need of their services there.
It's interesting you say that, but just to be clear, is there any chance that Wagner forces could return to fighting in Ukraine?
I think there is a possibility, because the contingent that is in Russia that has participated in the march towards Moscow has been offered an opportunity to sign an agreement with the Ministry of Defense in order to be able to operate in Ukraine but now as part of the Russian armed forces. So there would be a centralized command in a sense and unity of effort. So there is a possibility that these people will be swayed and offered maybe good salaries, because those are good fighters and Russia could certainly benefit from having them, specifically because they know the terrain, they have been in Ukraine and they have been fighting together. So I think that Russians will make the attempt to integrate them into their armed forces.
As things stand now, what will the loss of Wagner forces mean for Russia's war in Ukraine?
As it stands for now, it is difficult to say, because Wagner has not been on the battlefield since they gave the control of Bakhmut to the Russian forces, so they withdrew. So whatever happened after that didn't really require Wagner's services. This group has been designed to solve specific battlefield tasks, such as we've seen in Bakhmut, capturing cities. Right now, the Russians are more on the defensive. There is movement around Kremlin and Svatove and, Avdiivka, Marinka. Those places are still being troubled pockets for Ukrainians and for Russians alike. However, the Russians don't require that capability right now. So for now, we're all waiting to see the move by the Ukrainian forces while Russians are waiting for the counteroffensive or for this big fight. Therefore, I don't think that Russia will be lacking Wagner's skills at this point. However, later on, and I don't know how the MOD will resolve it, they might want to replace Wagner with somebody like Kadyrov. We don't know how they will fill that capabilities gap in the long term.
I mean, it was a very bold move by Prigozhin, right? In your opinion, why did he call off the rebellion?
Well, it was more theatrical. I mean, we have seen Wagner doing such things in the past when he threatened to withdraw from Bakhmut on one day, and next day he reversed the course of action and said that he would be staying. So this seemed like a gamble for Wagner, and there are different versions that exist that the FSB might have threatened his family. Either way, in terms of the kind of the risk calculus, the risk-benefit calculus, Wagner Group didn't really have enough capabilities militarily to present a threat to the Russian government. It didn't have the necessary support within the armed forces to do so as well. And other private military companies certainly didn't join in on Wagner. And so during this march, maybe Prigozhin also came to the realization that he cannot garner the support needed. And if he doesn't, then he wouldn't stand a chance, and it will end up in a bloodbath, costing more lives, and basically ending in nothing. Wouldn't lead to him achieving his aims, as in replacing the Minister of Defense.
Okay. Marina Miron, military analyst at King's College London. Thank you.
Thank you.